rejoice and be glad, for the springtime has come. We can throw down our shovels and go on the bum. Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. The springtime has come, and I'm just out of jail, without any money, without any bail. Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. I went to a house and I rapped on the door, and the lady says, "Bum, bum, you've been here before." Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. I like Jim Hill, he's a good friend of mine. That is why I am hiking down Jim Hill's main line. Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. I went to a house and I asked for some bread, and the lady says, "Bum, bum, the baker is dead." Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. Why don't you work like other men do? Now how can I work when there's no work to do? Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. Why don't you save all the money you earn? If I didn't eat, I'd have money to burn. Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. I don't like work, and work don't like me, and that is the reason I am so hungry. Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again.
For the benefit of the tape back there, I would commit this song to the memory of a gentleman whose grave I visited yesterday over there on the island, Ginger Goodwin. We went over and put flowers on his grave. Fine and remarkable man. So let's try it. Where the Fraser River flows, each fellow worker knows they have bullied and oppressed us, but still our union grows. And we're gonna find a way, boys, for shorter hours and higher pay, boys. And we're gonna win the day, boys, where the Fraser River flows. Fellow workers, pay attention to what I'm gonna mention, for it is the clear contention of the workers of the world that we should all be ready, true-hearted, brave, and steady, to rally round the standard when the red flag is unfurled. Where the Fraser River flows, each fellow worker knows they have bullied and oppressed us, but still our union grows. And we're gonna find a way, boys, shorter hours and higher pay, boys. And we're gonna win the day, boys, where the Fraser River flows. All these gunny sack contractors have all been dirty actors. They're not our benefactors, each fellow worker knows. So we gotta stick together in fine or dirty weather, and we'll show no white feather where the Fraser River flows. Where the Fraser River flows, each fellow worker knows they have bullied and oppressed us, but still our union grows. And we're gonna find a way, boys, shorter hours and higher pay, boys. And we're gonna win the day, boys, where the Fraser River flows. Now the boss the law is stretching, bulls and pimps he's fetching, and they're a fine collection as Jesus only knows. But why their mothers reared them, and why the devil spared them, are questions we can't answer where the Fraser River flows. Where the Fraser River flows, Each fellow worker knows they have bullied and oppressed us, but still our union grows. And we're gonna find a way, boys, shorter hours and higher pay, boys. And we're gonna win the day, boys, where the Fraser River flows.
I was born on the Dublin street where the Lyle drums did beat, and those loving English feet, they walked all over us. And every single night when me dad would come home tight, he didn't fight the neighbours out with his chorus. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lanes of Killishandra. Come, let us hear you tell how you slandered great Parnell when you thought him well and truly persecuted. Where are the sneers and jeers that you loudly let us hear when our leaders of 16 were executed? Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lanes of Killishandra. Come tell us how you slew them old Arabs 2 by 2. Like the Zulus, they had spears and bow and arrows. How bravely you faced one with your 16-pounder gun, and you frightened them damn natives to the marrow. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lanes of Killishandra. Now the time is coming fast, and I think them days are here when each English Johnny and he'll run before us. And if there'll be a need, then our kids will say Godspeed with the verse or two of singing this fine chorus. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lanes of Killishandra.
The bum on the rods is hunted down as an enemy of mankind. The other is driven around to his club, is feted, wined, and dined. And they who curse the bum on the rods as the essence of all that's bad will greet the other with a winning smile and extend the hand so glad. The bum on the rods is a social flea who gets an occasional bite. The bum on the plush is a social leech, blood-sucking day and night. The bum on the rods is a load so light that his weight we scarcely feel, but it takes the labor of dozens of folks to furnish the other a meal. As long as we sanction the bum on the plush, the other will always be there. But rid ourselves of the bum on the plush and the other will disappear. Then make an intelligent, organized kick. Get rid of the weights that crush. Don't worry about the bum on the rods. Get rid of the bum on the plush.
Oh, I'm just a typical American boy from a typical American town. I believe in God and Senator Dodd, and I keep an old Castro down. And when it came my time to serve, I knew better dead than red. But when I got to my old draft board, buddy, this is what I said. Sarge, I'm only 18, I got a ruptured spleen, and I always carry a purse. I've got eyes like a bat and my feet are flat, and my asthma's getting worse. Yes, think of my career, my sweetheart dear, my poor old invalid aunt. Besides, I ain't no fool, I'm a-going to school, and I'm a-working in a defense plant. I got a dislocated disc and a racked up back, I'm allergic to flowers and bugs. And when the bombshell hits, I get epileptic fits, and I'm addicted to 1,000 drugs. I got the weakness woes, I can't touch my toes, I can hardly reach my knees. And if the enemy came close to me, oh, I'd probably start to sneeze. I'm only 18, got a ruptured spleen, and I always carry a purse. I've got eyes like a bat, my feet are flat, my asthma's getting worse. Yes, think of my career, my sweetheart dear, my poor old invalid aunt. Besides, I ain't no fool, I'm a-going to school, and I'm a-working in a defense plant. Ooh, I hate showing lie, and I hope he dies. But one thing you gotta see, that someone's gotta go over there, and that someone isn't me. So I wish you well, Sarge, give him hell, kill me 1,000 or so. And if you ever get a war without blood and gore, I'll be the first to go. Yes, I'm only 18, I got a ruptured spleen, and I always carry a purse. I've got eyes like a bat, and my feet are flat, my asthma's getting worse. Yes, think of my career, my sweetheart dear, my poor old invalid aunt. Besides, I ain't no fool, I'm a-going to school, and I'm working in a defense plant.
It's up the ramp to the lumber camp with a sick and aching head. I blowed another winter's steak and I got the Jims instead. It seems I'll never learn the truth that's written plain as day. The more they try to welcome you, the more they make it pay. It's blankets, stiff and jungle hound, and pitch him out the door. Howdy, Jack, old timer, when you got the price for more. Oh, the boat, it's getting rocky, and I ain't got a bunk. Not a rare a cheering liquor, just a turkey full of junk. And it's all of my possessions is what I can carry round. I blowed the rest on the skid roads of 100 Jippo towns. It's lumberjack and timber beast, and give these bums a ride. Have one on the house, old boy, when you're stepping with the tide. Oh, the chokers will be heavy, just as cold, when the hooker gives the highball and we start to dig for gold. And I'll curse the skid road up and down with its rotten drunken tune. But then of course I'll up and make another trip next June. It's blanket, stiff and jungle hound, and pitch him out the door. Howdy, Jack, old timer, when you got the price for more.
Hi, friends. Hi, friends. Hi there. My name is Sleep. Welcome to the stream. Turn off this. Hi there. Welcome to the stream. So I haven't streamed in a while, and a lot of shit has happened since then. Just one more human being killed by ICE on the streets. execution style, and oops, hope I don't get in trouble for doing that, for saying some bad words there. But I'm at a point where it's like there's only so much rage and anger I can feel. Hold on. Let me. Okay. Sorry. And it is exhausting. And there's precious little I can do about it other than try to make some commentary, try to spread some messages of hope, and love and support to all my friends, and just hang on and educate myself and hope for the best. Today on the stream, I'm actually going to do something that I have already streamed about before, but it kind of got messed up, so I'm going to do it again. And hopefully I won't get dinged, because I tried to show the Wobblies documentary, but the version that's available on YouTube is cut. There's like 20-25 minutes that's been cut for some reason, and I wanted to watch the whole thing with you guys, and the only place I can do that is on Hoopla, which is my local library streaming service. However, I don't know if I'll get in trouble if I try to show the whole thing, but at this point I just want to watch the whole thing with you guys, and if I get in trouble, then that's my cross to bear. I have to belch. Save that for later. So we're gonna watch the Wobblies doc, and I'll try to present as much commentary as I can. So here we go. Make this so it's like that. So if you've seen this before, I apologize, but I wanted to watch the whole thing. So here we go. So here we go. So here we go. And we're going. And oh God. Hang on. Hang on. This is gonna happen, I swear. So, where are you folks from? Oh yeah? You don't say. I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm from the planet Mars. I'm in your walls. I'm right behind you. Yeah. Shit's fucked with, ice. And
What's your name?
Oh, okay, here we go.
Sam Scarlett. What's your religion? The IWW. That ain't no religion. The only one I got.
You know, there should be video here, but there's not. So I'm going to keep refreshing, see when the video pops up. This is going well so far. Hello everyone. Feel free to sign into the chat if you're here. Holla if you hear me. And at some point, I'm sure this is going to work. Oh God. Oh boy. This is great. Like I said, I don't have a lot to say about Good and Preti and Michael Porter. That hasn't already been said. I've been listening to a lot of really rage-filled, expletive-filled rants about that, and it's a nightmare. it's a gosh darn nightmare. And the people who have been telling me all my life that, you know, we need guns to protect from a tyrannical government, where you at? It's a damn shame. It's a damn shame. Man, this was working earlier. Let's see. I know I also have some stuff I wrote down. If we can get this working. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. Oh boy. So, where are you people from? Closing some tabs, see if that helps. Dear God. Anyone in the chat? Nope, no one in the chat. This is going so well. So well. Yeah, you know, between the Davos speech, which was humiliating internationally, and the Board of Peace, which is the biggest fucking cosmic joke I've ever heard in my life, like, the damage has been done to us internationally and nationally, because people are dying out in the streets, and no one, I mean, people are seeming to care, but not enough. It's all a mess, and all I want to do is watch a documentary on the Wobblies with y'all, but it doesn't seem to want to work. But it's funny that just every country on Earth is sick of our shit. Just realizing that we're essentially a basket case nation, and we can't be relied on, because even if we get rid of Trump, his cronies are still there. The people who voted for him are still there. And you know, you never know when we'll have another Trump in office, unless we have some sort of revolution. But chances are rather slim of that happening. I mean, every country on Earth is made aware that we've elected a syphilitic lunatic. Basically, every ugly American stereotype to be our leader. So, we've wrecked our standing in the world state, and it's going to take decades to undo the damage that's been done. If you don't live in the U.S., you should know that our country has been hijacked by a Yahtzee Fredophile death cult called MAGA, or Make America Great Again. In the past decade or so, this Yahtzee pedo cult has taken over one of our political parties, the GOP, which stands for the Guardians of Fredophiles. The head of this cult and this political party is a Yahtzee Fredophile rapist, who, not unlike the Austrian painter, is also an incompetent, crazy person who is trying to do as much damage to this country as possible before his final moments in his bunker. Inshallah. So, on that note, do I have anything else to say? Everything is so new, everything is so scary, and it could go in all sorts of ways. And it's funny to me that Trump's best qualities would be considered negatives in the average person. His best traits, and I mean this unironically, one of his best traits is that he's a coward. And I hate to imagine what it would be like if Trump actually had the courage of his convictions. Because if he were actually able to follow through on some of the stuff he wants to do, just glad we avoided that alternate timeline. And again, everything could change tomorrow. I mean, I remember when it felt like he was going to die on Labor Day, and that was a good time. But, I mean, he looks like hell. He can barely speak, barely form a coherent sentence, and all he does when he's actually lucid is lie and whine. And all the other countries are finally getting wise to this fact. And I mean, I grant you, I'm whining right now, but I'm not the president. I'm trying. All right, let's see if this thing works.
What's your name? Sam.
Well, the sound's working, but there's no fucking video. Might need to update. So until that time happens, let's see. This is going so well. So well. What else can I tell you about myself? Apparently, and I haven't really heard too much information about this, Pam Bondi is like, well, Tim Walz is like, I need you to get the fuck out of my state of Minnesota. And Pam Bondi is like, we will if you give us all the voter files that you have. I don't know what has happened after that, but I feel like that's par for the course for these people. You know, it's like they are cartoonishly evil. They're doing things that I don't know if people think this is funny or what. I know a lot of people voted for Trump for the lulz, but tain't funny. Tain't your dick, tain't your ass, tain't funny. Anyway, these are people's lives. These are our neighbors. And, they say they started this whole madness saying they're going after criminals, but that's not who I'm seeing getting shot in the streets. They're shooting American citizens. They're making orphans out of children. It's a damn shame. That's what it is. And I like for our country to get back on track. I'm working on that. I'm only one man with one stream that is constantly having technical difficulties. So anything you can do to help the stream not have technical difficulties, we rely a lot on your support. That makes this show possible. It's your support that makes this show possible. So if you are getting anything out of this, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, leave a comment, at least 8 words, press all the buttons, and help us get to a place where we can be a little more proud of our country. I'd like that. Yeah, Chrome's not even working. Jiminy Jillikers. I swear, I was watching this stuff earlier and it was working just fine. I don't know why it's not now. I think they're on to me. Could I possibly have a little less light? There we go. Whoops, sorry. Yeah. I mean, I could pretend that people are actually watching and I'm getting donations. Oh, Timothy Willoughby, thank you so much for the dono. Well, now it got too dark. Now it's too dark. I might have got kicked off of Instagram. That's cool. Whoops, sorry. Yeah. I mean, I could pretend that people are actually watching and I'm getting donations. Oh, Timothy Willoughby, thank you so much for the donate. Sorry. I went on my own. I started watching myself on Instagram. I'm pretty funny. I like myself unconditionally. I like myself unconditionally. I like myself unconditionally. So I'm going to try this again. I've updated Chrome. Oh, and if I can ever get this freaking video started, I'm probably not going to do too much commentary because I actually have some work to do in the background. But that might not matter because... Oh, here we go. Is it working? Could it be? My God. What have I done? Yes. Okay, finally. Sorry. Thank you for your patience. Alright. Hello?
What's your name?
Sam Scarlett.
What's your religion?
The IWW.
That ain't no religion.
Are you for real?
The only one I got.
Who's your next of kin?
I don't have any.
Well, who's your best friend?
Big Bill Haywood.
He's in here with you.
He's still my best friend.
What's your nationality?
None.
Well, what country are you a citizen of?
I am a citizen of industry.
Where is your home?
Cook County Jail.
Before that?
County Jail, Cleveland, Ohio.
And before that?
Bruh. It was working for a second. You saw it. I wonder if I'm getting like emails saying stop showing our movies. Oh boy. Just want to
My best friend.
I just want to show people the Wobblies. That's all. Is that so wrong? Is it so wrong to want to show people the Wobbly documentary? Maybe it's me. Maybe, you know. Well, I can get the sound working, but I got no visuals. Let's see. Video, sounds, blurry buffering, play, video will play. My bandwidth speed is 135 Mbps. Is that good? I don't know. I don't know anything. I'm just a small boy. Alright. I think I might have to do an audible, because this is bogus. Instead of the Wobbly Doc, I'm going to watch as much as I can of this other thing. Of like what kind of communist you are. Alright. This is my last try to get this Wobbly's doc to work. If it doesn't, work after I've refreshed. Oh, it could work now. Please. Please. I beg of you. Hello? 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 Wow, not even now the sound isn't even working. Okay. All right, friends. We're not giving up. We're not going away. We're going to watch some YouTube, as much of this as we can stand. Yeah. An error. Oh, that's a good sign. That's a good sign. Rejoice and be glad. For the springtime has gone. We can rub our shoulders and go on the bum. Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Okay. Alright, so instead of the Wobblies doc, which of course I couldn't get to work, we're going to watch as much as we can handle this One Dime documentary, Types of Marxism Explained, the Far Left Iceberg. While I'm doing that, I'm going to do some stuff off camera. I'm going to still be on screen, so stuff on camera. But I gotta do some stuff on my phone while this is going. So, here we go. I love you. Bye-bye.
One week later. So you become a little critical of this whole capitalism thing. Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn lost their elections, the liberal politicians suck donkey balls, and you feel a little disenchanted. Maybe you get radicalized and go down the communist rabbit hole and discover a whole new universe online.
The critique of ideology.
You get exposed to this vast marketplace of political ideologies, and you find out about these niches like BreadTube or BeardTube. You've probably also noticed a lot of people on Twitter self-identifying with various communist labels. And you might be thinking, what do all these ideologies mean? What do they stand for? Orthodox Marxism, Marxism-Leninism, Trotskyism, left communism, Maoism, Marxism-Leninism, Maoism, libertarian communism, MAGA communism? Yeah, apparently that's a thing.
Corporate communism.
Yeah, that's not a thing. Or maybe you're just a healthy, normal person who isn't terminally online and is just curious about the history of Marxism and its many different variants.
Do I have to be a communist to read Karl Marx?
Either because you find yourself to be a communist sympathizer, or you just hate all this commie gobbledygook and want to get to know your enemy better.
Sounds like some commie gobbledygook.
Maybe you're somebody who thinks they're already familiar with all these ideologies, and thinks they have figured it all out.
Everyone is stupid except me.
And you're trying to see which ideology that I identify with. Spoiler alert, none of them. There's something for everybody in this video. CIA, if you're watching this, you can get something out of this video too. And this is why I can be relatively unbiased when covering this topic. Because due to morbid fixation, I have spent way too much time reading about all this stuff and spending a lot of time in these sort of Marxist circles to get to know them.
You're a first-year grad student. You just got finished reading some Marxian historian.
There are many types of communism. But in this video, we are just going to be going over the main types of Marxism. And you'd be surprised just how many factional splits there are. There are more types of Marxism than there are Marxists.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 million.
And there really isn't a good comprehensive guide out there that goes over all of them accurately from a relatively unbiased view. Now you could spend the time to read about each and every one of them by yourself.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
And you might just find yourself getting stuck in a crazy cult or in a red goth phase. This is going to be kind of like an iceberg video, starting with the most historically significant tendencies. By the end of the video, you might find which flavor of Marxism speaks to you.
Christ be with you.
Or you might just find them all cringe. Either way, I can assure you that you'll get a lot of insight into learning about all these different tendencies. So grab a beer, popcorn, a blunt, whatever suits you, as we dive straight into the rabbit hole. Now, as Karl Marx has...
Should I grab a blunt? I could, but I should not, because that'll make me even more awkward on camera. So, here we go.
His mother once said,
"If Karl spent as much time making capital as he did writing about it, then he would be a very rich man."
And I don't got that Soros money or the She-Bucks to fund this video. So, this video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. If you want to protect against the big corporate communist tyranny, then better get yourself a VPN. With Surfshark, you can encrypt your time. Surfshark offers various non-time. Surfshark offers a third. Big Brother is always watching you. Alright, let's get back to explaining what all this commie gobbledygook is all about.
Shouldn't you start with Marxism?
Leninism was, of course, the political doctrine associated with Vladimir Lenin, leader of the Bolshevik Party. And no, Leninism is not to be confused with Marxism-Leninism. Marxism-Leninism wasn't formally invented until after Lenin's death. Many Marxist tendencies are influenced by Vladimir Lenin that aren't Marxism-Leninism, like Trotskyism and certain forms of left communism and various non-sectarian Marxisms. Oh, don't worry, we'll get back to Marxism-Leninism later.
Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov.
Originally, Lenin just considered himself to be a Russian Marxist aiming to apply Marxist ideas to the unique socio-political conditions of Russia, and to put forth what he believed to be was the correct interpretation of Marxism.
You're confusing a party with a movement, comrade. They're not the same thing.
But of course, Lenin would go on to make some hugely influential contributions to Marxist theory that would lead to Leninism becoming a comprehensive political doctrine of its own that would be considered a novel variant of Marxism to be distinguished from all other types of Marxism. Leninism became the glue of the Bolshevik Party, which took power in October of 1917, and eventually became the ruling party of the Soviet Union. Leninism and Bolshevism aren't exactly the same thing, but you could say that Bolshevism is 100% Leninist, but all Leninists aren't necessarily Bolsheviks. But most certainly, you could obviously say the Bolsheviks were the first Leninist party. This is why Leninism is often used synonymously with Bolshevism, even though this ideology would mutate considerably after Lenin's death. At its core, Leninism is a form of Marxism in power. It was the first time in modern history when the working class, or at least a political party representing the working class, was the ruling party in power. It is why it is considered to be the first proletarian revolution. But of course, Russia was primarily peasants, and the revolution was shaped not just by workers, but also by peasants. This is why the communist flag includes the hammer and the sickle. The hammer representing the working class, the proletariat, and the sickle representing the peasantry. This flag was born out of the Worker-Peasant Alliance, which was seen as necessary in order for the revolution to succeed, because the working class was simply far too small for the revolution to be based solely on it. Leninism emerged through what was essentially a crisis in orthodox Marxism. Previously, Marxists saw capitalism as a progressive development. Despite its brutal exploitation, environmental destruction, and chaotic boom and bust cycles, capitalism created a lot of wealth, which led to the rapid development of productive forces. Classical Marxists believed that society needed to be already wealthy and technologically advanced enough before it was ready for socialism. You need to have wealth before you can distribute it, after all. And they believed that all this wealth was being produced on the backs of a growing alienated proletariat who would become the new revolutionary subject. And when capitalist crisis would reach a breaking point, they would be the class with the most self-interest and the most power to opt for a revolution. They would have the self-interest because they had nothing to lose but their chains, as they owned nothing but their own labor. And unlike the peasantry, they actually had the power to organize and bring production to a halt. But by the 20th century, it had become increasingly clear that Marx's predictions hadn't exactly panned out. The anticipated proletarian revolutions in advanced Western nations were nowhere to be found. Enter your boy Vladimir Lenin,
Must crush capitalism.
who had to somehow figure out how to build a revolution in a country like Russia, which was about as far from the ideal preconditions for socialism that Marx considered were necessary in order for socialism to be possible. We're talking about a semi-feudal country with a mostly peasant population and barely any industrial proletariat. In the build-up to 1917, many Marxists at the time had agreed that the situation in Russia was ripe for major changes, just not a socialist revolution. The best that Russia could hope for was a completion of its bourgeois democratic revolution.
From the Volinsky and Pavlovsky regiments!
But Lenin believed that socialist revolution was possible in Russia, and his conviction was driven by his observation that capitalism was entering its imperialist stage. In his famous book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, Lenin built on the ideas of his fellow Bolshevik comrade Nikolai Bukharin.
I read that. It's pretty good. I'm gonna take a small break. Maybe I will do that thing I said I would do earlier, and I'll be right back. I'll have some so you're not completely alone in silence. I'm really sad that the Wobblies didn't work out. Oops. Alright, hold on. Oh yeah. Also, I meant to say R.I.P. Michael Parenti. That's pretty sad. I mean, the guy was pretty old, but yeah, I might talk about him a lot more as we go on. I need to read more of his. I haven't read any of his books, to be honest. I'm still, one of the reasons why I'm watching this video is I'm still a baby commie. I haven't actually read a lot. I've been reading stuff. I read Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, and it kind of blew my mind, honestly, because the stuff that Lenin was talking about over 100 years ago is still going on. Anyway, I'll be right back.
To the Battle of New Orleans at the end of the early British wars. The young land started growing, the young blood started flowing, but I ain't a marching anymore. For I killed my share of Injuns in 1,000 different fights. I was there at the Little Big Horn. I heard many men a-lying, I saw many more a-dying, but I ain't a marching anymore. It's always the old to lead us to the wars, always the young to fall. Now look at all we've won with the saber and the gun. Tell me, is it worth it all? For I stole California from the Mexican land, fought in the bloody Civil War. Yes, I even killed my brothers and so many others, but I ain't a marching anymore. For I marched to the battles of the German trench in a war that was bound to end all wars. Oh, I must have killed 1 million men and now they want me back again, but I ain't a marching anymore. It's always the old to lead us to the wars, always the young to fall. Now look at all we've won with the saber and the gun. Tell me, is it worth it all? For I flew the final mission in the Japanese skies, set off the mighty mushroom roar. When I saw the cities burning, I knew that I was learning that I ain't a marching anymore. Now the labor leaders screaming when they close the missile plant. United Fruit screams at the Cuban shore. Call it peace or call it treason, call it love or call it reason, but I ain't marching anymore. No, I ain't marching anymore.
Do 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 do. Yeah 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 yeah. You ought to see my baby. She really make you stare. She holds my hands in both of hers while the other one strokes my hair. She's my radiation baby. She's my teenage Paula queen. Step, and she was waiting there for me. Her heart was in her hand. She's my radiation baby. She's my teenage Paula queen.
I remember it well, my darling. The night we had our fight. Threw my class ring in the grass as we sat in the park that night. We were kissing and making up when we saw that blinding light. And I didn't know you weren't with me, dear, when they locked the shelter tight.
You went back for my class ring where you left it in the park. Now when it's on your finger, dear, whoa, 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 in the dark, you're my radiation baby. You're my teenage Paula queen. Your clothes like a sack to me, and your head is heavy. That it had cleared up your skin. So hold me close, my darling, for I know what you've got. My Geiger counter, dear, tells me that you're hot. You're my radiation baby. You're my teenage fallout.
Okay. Hello. We are now returning to the libretto. Here we go.
Extended Marxist theory by analyzing imperialism as a newer stage in capitalist development. In this stage of monopoly capitalism, the biggest corporations are no longer content with just dominating their home countries. They have to expand globally. Governments use their military power to extract resources from third world countries and open up new markets. The falling rate of profit inherent to capitalist companies and the constant drive for
I'm enjoying the editing here. I've been watching some Asmongold, and I noticed that he doesn't actually contribute anything. He just randomly says stuff. So I'm going to say some really meaningless things at times. So maybe I can be as good as him.
expansion among different capitalist empires meant that the interests of different capitalist nations will inevitably come into conflict.
Any war undertaken by a capitalist government is imperialism. Hasn't the clown read any books?
The contradictions of imperialism, the exploitation of colonies, the crushing of workers' rights, the endless wars, meant that revolution was indeed possible, desirable, and necessary, not just for Russia, but for the world. And contrary to what Marx originally thought, these revolutions would not start in the most advanced capitalist nations, but rather in the exploited periphery, the colonized countries, because the expansion of imperialism would lead to super profits that would lead to a much more well-paid working class and what Lenin called a labor aristocracy, a section of the working class that was much more well-paid relative to the rest of the working class, which would serve to divide the working class and make them less prone to revolution, unlike the exploited classes of the colonized world who would have nothing to lose. This flipped classical Marxist conceptions on their head. But what was to be done? If all this was inevitable, would revolution be inevitable? Unlike most communists of his time, Lenin was skeptical of the idea of revolutionary spontaneity, an idea held by many radicals at the time, which was that the masses themselves would make revolution spontaneously from the bottom up. In his major text, What is to be Done, Lenin observed that many working class movements were stuck in what he called trade union consciousness, meaning that workers' organizations generally just opted for short-term compromises, like wage increases, and better workers' rights, rather than striving for the long-term goal of revolution, to overthrow the system entirely and replace it with a new socialist one. This was a tendency that Lenin observed with the working class in virtually all capitalist countries. But the case with Russia was even worse, because Russia barely had a proletariat to begin with. Even though the country had a quite revolutionary situation, most of its people were peasants. Lenin's answer? The Vanguard Party, a tightly centralized, disciplined group of professional revolutionaries. This party would spearhead class consciousness and lead the proletariat to revolution. The Vanguard Party would provide the political education and direction needed for revolution. The structure of this type of party is quite hierarchical, and although there's supposed to be democracy within the Vanguard Party, once a decision is made by that party loyalty must be strictly adhered to, with people following the party line. This conception of how a party was supposed to work is often called democratic centralism.
How can we improve its work? What's wrong with its work?
Function is growing faster than its structure. It's the practical problems of party organization.
Unlike orthodox Marxists, who viewed class struggle as a gradual process tied to economic development, Lenin argued that the revolutionary conditions could be accelerated through the strategic intervention by this Vanguard Party. In other words, this Vanguard Party was supposed to make an intervention into history. Lenin was well aware that Russia didn't exactly have the prime conditions for socialism, but his hope was that the Russian Revolution would trigger socialist upheaval in advanced capitalist countries, particularly in Europe. But this just didn't pan out. The German Revolution of 1919 was defeated. Attempted revolutions elsewhere were also crushed and overthrown, like in Poland and Finland. So as the revolution failed in the First World, Lenin turned his eyes to the developing world. Lenin's prediction that revolution would emanate from the Third World proved to be true, as what happened wasn't so much communist revolutions but national liberation movements. Leninism would go on to influence various revolutionaries in the Third World, where Marx and Engels did not consider socialism to be possible, like China, Vietnam, and various countries in Latin America. Now keep in mind, at this time, Leninism still wasn't thought of as a thing. You had revolutionaries across the world trying to implement Marxism in their respective ways. But after the establishment of the Soviet Union, the Bolsheviks were able to claim that their model of Marxism actually worked while the rest didn't, even though the failure of Marxism elsewhere was of course due to much more complex factors, not just ideas. After Lenin's death, Stalin coined the term Marxism-Leninism and codified it as the official
Anyway, I don't have much to say other than having fun. I guess this stuff can be scary. But anyway, fucked
ideology of the Soviet state. The Comintern, also known as the Communist International or the Third International, a global association of communist parties founded in 1919 by the Soviet Union, would try to export communist influence worldwide, and in doing so, they would choose to mainly prop up communist parties that would agree to abide by official Marxist-Leninist doctrine. This export of Marxist-Leninist ideology globally would lead to Marxism-Leninism eventually triumphing over all other Marxist ideologies, becoming the dominant form of doctrinaire Marxism. Now, some people believe that Stalin betrayed the revolution and distorted Lenin's legacy, while others believe that Stalin merely took Leninism to its logical conclusion. The most notorious faction of Marxism that subscribes to the betrayal narrative is, of course, Trotskyism. Trotskyism is a Marxist ideology based on the ideas and theories of course, Leon Trotsky, a prominent Russian revolutionary, Marxist theorist, and key leader in the October Revolution of 1917. Trotsky was, of course, in the Bolshevik Party and was a rival of Joseph Stalin.
Trotsky wasted his last chance to stop my father.
When Stalin took power,
he underestimated the man he called a mule.
And Trotsky was criticizing Stalin's policies. He basically got exiled, he went to Mexico, and then Stalin's secret police basically gave him an ice pick to the head. R.I.P. After Trotsky's death, many Trotskyist groups formed. Trotskyists are notorious for sectarian splits. Get 3 Trotskyists in a room and you get 4 different political parties. But notwithstanding their differences, there are some core beliefs that Trotskyist groups generally all share, most of which come directly from Trotsky himself. Trotskyism is centered on internationalism, permanent revolution, and opposition to bureaucracy. Most importantly, Trotskyism is defined by a defense of Leninism but an opposition to Stalinism. Trotsky believed that the idea of socialism just existing in one country was impossible. He believed it required a global revolution in order to survive. The success of socialism depends on the revolution spreading internationally in many different countries, especially the developed ones, with developed and less developed countries supporting one another. Otherwise, a socialist revolution would be doomed and encircled by imperialist powers. This internationalist idea, although associated with Trotsky, is closer to the original ideas of Marx himself. Because capitalism was a global socioeconomic order, it only made sense to them that transitioning to socialism would also be an international project. Trotsky saw revolution as a continuous global process with the ultimate goal of creating a worldwide socialist system. This is his idea of permanent revolution. He didn't think you could just develop a socialist state in one country and then keep it like that. For Trotsky, he was all about revolution all the time. Sometimes you wonder that, like, in Trotsky's world, would the workers just not get tired of revolution all the time? In his most famous book, The Revolution Betrayed, Trotsky also criticized the totalitarian bureaucratic nature of the Soviet Union under Stalin, calling it a, quote, degenerated workers' state. He believed that it was a dictatorship of the proletariat to a certain extent, but it was more so a dictatorship of a proletarian party over the proletariat, and that the bureaucracy had basically become a new ruling class that was separated and distant from the proletariat. Trotsky still believed in the dictatorship of the party, though. He more or less agreed with all the Leninist principles, but he did believe in democracy within the party. And most importantly for Trotsky, this party had to represent the proletariat. But he basically thought that this party democracy had turned into a dictatorship of one man and his allies. Trotsky was not anti-Soviet. He was not an opponent of Soviet power. While he gave scathing critiques of Stalin's leadership and believed that the Soviet Union had many problems, he did not altogether condemn it. He actually defended the experiment until the day he died. But see, Trotsky was a mixed bag. In The Revolution Betrayed, which was the book he wrote after he got exiled, Trotsky advocated for greater workers' democracy and checks on the power of the bureaucracy. This is why many people have the impression of Trotsky being the more democratic, humane, and sophisticated alternative compared to Joseph Stalin. Trotsky is like the ultimate alpha nerd archetype. Military commander, intellectual, put Marxism into practice. He has a track record until he got ice-picked by Stalin. I mean, what's there not to like about the guy? and he didn't have to get his hands dirty by holding power. Trotsky is a symbol of what could have been and a fantasy for alternative history nerds who want to believe that maybe the Soviet Union would have been less shitty if he was in charge. Now, while Trotsky and Stalin never really liked each other, the reality was that Trotsky didn't come to his more democratic and anti-bureaucratic positions until it was far too late. It wasn't really till he got purged from the party and sent into exile where he actually came to his senses about democracy. Before that, Trotsky actually supported policies that were very close to what would become some of Stalin's worst policies 10 years later, such as forced collectivization, which Trotsky advocated already in the 1920s. And if you read his book Terrorism and Communism, you'll see that Trotsky does not care about democracy or checks on power whatsoever, although Trotskyist parties never really got around to succeeding in making a revolution anywhere. Trotskyism has tended to be one of the more popular strands of Marxism in Western democracies, which really isn't saying a lot. And of course, if you embrace Trotskyism, you can say, oh, that Stalin guy? Oh, I have nothing to do with him. I hate him. Soviet Union, bad. But Trotskyism allows one to pretty much keep all the core tenets of Leninism without the Stalin baggage. It's a grand narrative where Stalin is able to play the villain and Trotsky is the tragic hero who could have maybe just made everything better if he was in power. Trotskyism provides a very attractive grand narrative to explain what went wrong with the history of Marxism. It gives them an explanation for what went wrong with the history of socialism without having to rethink much of the core tenets of Marxism or Leninism. Marxism-Leninism is arguably the most historically significant strand of Marxism, in that it was adopted by a wide variety of regimes. Marxism-Leninism has also experienced somewhat of a revival in recent years, for better or for worse. However, most people don't really know about the history of Marxism-Leninism or what Marxist-Leninists, known as MLs, are all about, including many MLs themselves. Marxism-Leninism isn't just Marx plus Lenin. The term Marxism-Leninism was actually coined by Joseph Stalin. It became the legitimating ideology of the Soviet regime. Stalin is credited for synthesizing Marxism-Leninism, particularly in his book called The Foundations of Leninism. It was primarily Stalin and his supporters who standardized Marxism-Leninism as the guiding doctrine of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the CPSU. The formation of Marxism-Leninism was meant to establish a continuity from Marx and Engels to Lenin to Stalin, effectively sidelining other interpretations of Marxism and other factions within the Bolshevik Party, which were all gradually eliminated. But if Lenin didn't invent the term Marxism-Leninism, how did it become the dominant version of Marxism? The one that was adopted by almost all of the Soviet regimes, at least for a certain point? Well, that answer is largely due to geopolitics. Countries or political parties that wanted Soviet aid had to embrace the particular kind of Marxism that the Soviet Union was championing. That's why Fidel Castro, who initially came to power not as a communist, but as a progressive nationalist, eventually adopted the label Marxism-Leninism in order to help get Soviet aid when they needed it against American intervention. And it also became the dominant form of Marxism because this thing called the Comintern. The Comintern was sort of like the ideological mouthpiece of the Soviet Union. It was the propaganda tool of getting out its message and providing various political parties around the world with instructions and support. They sort of exported their particular model of socialism to various places, and this helped bolster the Soviet Union's legitimacy and its sphere of influence, but it also made it so this very particular form of Marxism became the dominant form of Marxism. I would say it's more of a regime legitimating ideology rather than an actual ideology of revolution, because it wasn't conceived in the midst of trying to make revolution, but rather in the process of governing a regime and legitimating that regime's rule. Leninism was an ideology of revolution in third world countries. Marxism-Leninism is an ideology of regime legitimation. It's an ideology to justify the existence of the Soviet Communist Party and why they're doing what they're doing. Because remember, they weren't elected. Most countries get their legitimacy through elections. You know, you hate what we do? Too bad, buddy. You elected us. Stick with it. Suck it. But in the Soviet Union, where, you know, there wasn't really election of parties, they legitimized themselves on the basis that they were a communist party, a dictatorship of the proletariat, trying to take people towards this communism thing. And it was to go through stages, going through the stage of socialism, gradually to communism. Eventually, socialism just got watered down to mean the raising of living standards. And when these living standards were no longer rising, they got in trouble. Marxism-Leninism has been claimed by a wide variety of regimes, parties, and leaders who have very different politics. Many different regimes have claimed to be Marxist-Leninist at different points in history. The Soviet Union, Mao's China, Vietnam, Mongolia, Afghanistan, Hoxha's Albania, East Germany, Tito's Yugoslavia, and the whole Eastern Bloc of Soviet states all claimed Marxism-Leninism as their official ideology, despite having major differences. I mean, the USSR and China almost went to war, for God's sake. Vietnam and China also almost went to war. And Tito and Stalin were always trying to kill each other. Meanwhile, Albania was all the way in the corner by itself, just chilling, doing its own thing. Oh, and then there's Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. That was an absolute shit show. Oh, and when it comes to Marxism-Leninism, for some reason, barely anybody talks about the entire continent of Africa. A bunch of African countries also had regimes ruled by groups that called themselves Marxist-Leninist, like Angola, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Somalia, Madagascar, and Burkina Faso. Some say that many of the Marxist-Leninist groups who took power in these countries just called themselves Marxist-Leninist in order to get Soviet weapons, which they used to fight off the European colonizers, as well as their political rivals who were also vying for power. And it was a real way to get Soviet aid. However, which parties really believed in Marxism-Leninism and which ones did not is sometimes difficult to tell. Despite undergoing profound changes like the implementation of market reforms, countries like modern China, Vietnam, Laos, and Cuba are all ruled by parties that still claim to be Marxist-Leninist to this very day. What do all these highly different regimes even have in common with each other that makes them Marxist-Leninist? There are indeed some features that the various Marxist-Leninist regimes had in common, even if you think that they were just Marxist in name only. One of these features is, of course, the one-party rule. Marxism-Leninism could best be described as the attempt to turn Leninism into an official regime ideology, to legitimize the power of the ruling party, the party state. In Marxist-Leninist states, there was usually no separation between party and state. They had a monopoly on political power. They were supposed to be the only legitimate party allowed to rule. And the rule was often codified into constitutional law. Like, literally, their rule is built into the Constitution. In these sort of one-party state systems, the Communist Party basically became the ruling elite. They had privileges that the majority of the population did not have. Nationalism and isolationism are also notable features of Marxist-Leninist regimes. Originally, Marxism was all about the international proletarian revolution. Workers of the world unite. But this didn't go that far. The fact of the matter is that virtually every single regime that called itself Marxist-Leninist or communist ended up embracing nationalism. And many of the Marxist-Leninist regimes that were established originally came out of national liberation movements, not communist revolutions. Cuba, Vietnam, and China are such examples. And of course, another feature of Marxist-Leninist regimes is what is known as the command economy. Basically, total state control of everything. The state controlled virtually all industries and set production targets to meet social needs. But eventually, these didn't really meet people's needs. However, China, Vietnam, and to a lesser extent even Cuba have since moved away from these sort of economic models and now have a mixed economy, with both socialistic and capitalistic aspects. Marxism-Leninism has undoubtedly influenced socialist movements around the world. However, the systems that have been produced in its name have been criticized for their bureaucratic inefficiency, suppression of dissent, and deviations from Marx's original vision. Yet for those who defend Marxism-Leninism, these regimes represented a pragmatic approach to achieving socialism under real-world constraints. Marxist-Leninists often claim that all the things that happened under these regimes, whether it be famines, mismanagement, repression of dissent, all had a reason. And they often use Marx's original historical materialist framework to justify this, by saying that they had to overcome contradictions and objective material constraints. And because of these objective laws of history and these objective conditions, there was no way these regimes could exist without having to resort to these sort of actions. These actions were inevitable consequences of this. However, many Marxist-Leninists do in fact critique these regimes for their excesses, but they rarely ever reject the overall systems and models that they were based on entirely. For them, the problem with these regimes was a matter of policy differences and excesses, not its overall vision. However, when it comes to Marxist-Leninist ideology, there are also a faction of MLs who do not consider these regimes to be socialists at all. Rather, they consider them to be revisionists. This brings us to the distinction between anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists and what I call the generic Marxist-Leninists. Basically, the generic MLs tend to support most, if not all, regimes that have a red flag. That is, regimes that call themselves Marxist-Leninist. Anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists basically emerged as Marxist-Leninist purists after Stalin died. Those who adhere to this sort of thinking will often be critical of past socialist regimes and the current ones, but for reasons that you might not expect.
So I got a little toasty in case you couldn't tell. But I just wanted to say that I've been thinking about this a lot, and I haven't written anything down, but just the idea that like maybe the problem with Marxist-Leninism is just the name, because you read Marx and he kind of hold on, did that not have sound this whole time? Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm tripping. The reason why I'm gonna change this light scenario here. Okay. The reason why I don't call myself a Marxist-Leninist is because I prefer the name scientific socialist, because that kind of goes back to, I mean, that's what Marx called it, and like, when you call an ideology after a human being, it really messes up that ideology. I think a lot of this side of the spectrum, and maybe I'm a shit lib or whatever, but it's like, they're just too hung up on these personalities. It's sort of, I don't know, it's like, I need to develop this more, but it's sort of like, like a backdoor to great man theory. I don't know, that's the best I can come up with, but I don't know. But I'm suspicious of this whole documentary because he's spending a long time just like telling one side of the story, and I want to be like, are you never going to talk about the CIA and what they were up to? Anywho. Getting a little toasty, I apologize. Hold on. Back it up a little bit. Okay.
Leninist. Anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists basically emerged as Marxist-Leninist purists after Stalin died. Those who adhere to this sort of thinking will often be critical of past socialist regimes and the current ones, but for reasons that you might not expect. In the weird world of communism today, you will often encounter two types of Marxist-Leninists. First, the general Marxist-Leninist camp, being the far more common type, and the anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninist camp, which are sort of like the ML purists who consider themselves to be the true followers of Marxism-Leninism. According to these types, the general Marxist-Leninists are revisionists. Generally speaking, the general Marxist-Leninists are rather indifferent to this label of revisionist. The anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists are sort of a dying breed nowadays. Most of them have moved into the Maoist camp by this point, which we'll talk about later. While the differences between these two variants of Marxism-Leninism might just seem like semantic hair-splitting, they're actually quite important, and the differences are honestly fascinating. And it is a super important split in the history of communism. So on the one hand, you have the general Marxist-Leninists, who are essentially the pragmatist catch-all tendency of the Marxist world. So pragmatic that, with a straight face, they'll simultaneously defend Stalin's anti-revisionist purges and Deng Xiaoping's capitalist market reforms, Mao's Cultural Revolution against the capitalist roaders, and Xi Jinping's Confucian socialism with Chinese characteristics. USSR's central planning, and China's dismantlement of collective agriculture in favor of factories open to Western capital, all while claiming the legacy.
Did he do was he doing the political compass chart there? Or, no, there's Stalin and, I don't know, they should be switched, but
the capitalist rotors, and Xi Jinping's Confucian socialism with capitalist, Chinese characteristics, USSR's central planning, and China's dismantlement of collective agriculture in favor of factories open to Western capital, all while claiming the legacy of Che Guevara, a Marxist-Leninist who criticized the Soviet Union for being too capitalist, for trying to compete with the United States on capitalist terms. Seriously though, while it may seem like MLs are willing to support any regime with a red flag, according to their perspective, all of these experiments represented cases of actually existing socialism. They aren't perfect, and we ain't gotta defend everything, but it's the best we got. At least that's how they see things. So while they might provide some light critiques of these regimes here and there, at the end of the day, Marxist-Leninists tend to defend virtually all regimes that are officially governed by Marxist-Leninist parties, that claim to be socialists and are advancing towards socialism. This includes Marxist-Leninist regimes of the past and present, including the USSR from Stalin to Brezhnev, Communist China from Mao to Xi, and Vietnam from Ho Chi Minh to Ho Chi Minh Stock Index? Yep, that's a thing. They really called it that. Even though China and Vietnam have embraced what are objectively capitalist reforms, general Marxist-Leninists believe that these regimes are still nonetheless socialist because they define socialism itself as being a transitional state. And they believe the official Communist Party's claim to be advancing towards communism or a more advanced stage of socialism. By 2024, 2050, 2070, or whatever future date the ruling party decides to postpone it to next. Basically, the pitch is that these countries need to develop the productive forces and get rich enough before communism is possible. And fair enough. As you might recall, Marx himself did think that you needed to get rich enough before socialism was possible. But he didn't call the process of getting rich itself socialism. That's a Marxist-Leninist intervention. But MLs will say that these reforms aren't really capitalism in the Western sense because it's being done by a proletarian dictatorship for the people. The people's billionaires, bruh. For real though, Canada and America could learn a thing or two from how China builds trains so damn fast. But is China socialist? Leave a comment as to what you think. Is Marxism-Leninism just a regime ideology to legitimize the authority of a political party desperate to hold on to power? And is being a Marxist-Leninist nowadays just an aesthetic? Many people don't take Marxism-Leninism seriously and dismiss it as a terminally online phenomenon or just a bunch of kids playing dress-up. And I can see why they think that. However, it very much is a growing ideology. Whether it will manifest in anything is a whole other story. But because most people don't take Marxism-Leninism seriously, they usually don't engage with it and try to refute their arguments, which ends up allowing Marxist-Leninists to seclude themselves into an echo chamber, where their views are rarely challenged. It may seem bizarre how Marxist-Leninists today try to reconcile the very contradictory legacies of Marxist-Leninist leaders and regimes, and try to defend policies that blatantly contradict the stated goals of Marxism. However, from the modern Marxist-Leninist perspective, China and Vietnam's market reforms represent pragmatic adaptations of Marxist theory, not violations of it. According to them, Marxist theory put in practice was always about navigating the contradictions and material conditions of the historical process. The intellectual rationalization for this remarkable flexibility lies in the Marxist-Leninist interpretation of dialectical materialism, a supposedly scientific framework that studies history as a process driven by the contradictions within material conditions. Marxist-Leninists often deploy historical materialism like a Swiss army knife to rationalize just about any policy that a Communist Party implements as part of the socialist transition. And for any of the MLs rushing to the comment section right now telling me to read X or Y Marxist-Leninist text, trust me, I've read quite a lot of the Marxist-Leninist literature. I've read Stalin's Foundations of Leninism, Xi Jinping's Manifesto, and even this big-ass official state-sanctioned Vietnamese textbook on Marxism-Leninism. I just think that, as a matter of principle, it's not very wise to take official state propaganda at face value. Now, to be fair, while Marxist-Leninists don't necessarily defend every action that Marxist-Leninist regimes have undertaken,
well, I mean, what do you consider a state at this point? Sorry, the door was open. I just want to say that I want to apologize. I thought this was going to be more like basic, but he's like he's doing a lot of criticizing it, but he's not talking about capitalism at all. I don't know. I thought it was going to be more icebergy. I mean, we're getting to the iceberg. Sorry, this is like 2.5 hours long, and I'm stoned. 3 hours long.
They generally insist on framing atrocity.
Okay, I'm gonna back it up, and then hopefully that part will never see the light of day.
The Marxist-Leninist interpretation of dialectical materialism, a supposedly scientific framework that studies history as a process driven by the contradictions within material conditions. Marxist-Leninists often deploy historical materialism like a Swiss army knife to rationalize just about any policy that a communist party implements as part of the socialist transition. And for any of the MLs rushing to the comment section right now telling me to read X or Y Marxist-Leninist text, trust me, I've read quite a lot of the Marxist-Leninist literature. I've read Stalin's Foundations of Leninism, Xi Jinping's Manifesto, and even this big-ass official state-sanctioned Vietnamese textbook on Marxism-Leninism. I just think that, as a matter of principle, it's not very wise to take official state propaganda at face value. Now, to be fair, while Marxist-Leninists don't necessarily defend every action that Marxist-Leninist regimes have undertaken, they generally insist on framing atrocities as either excesses that were inevitable because of the material conditions, or necessary responses to counter-revolutionary threats. The psychological appeal of being a general ML isn't hard to understand. There's something deeply satisfying about cheering for what appears to be a winning team. And even though the previous Marxist-Leninist regimes all fell like dominoes, which Marxist-Leninists generally like to blame mostly on Gorbachev and CIA-backed color revolutions, general Marxism-Leninism remains appealing because there was a real legacy there. Why put in the effort to think of new alternatives when you can just point to something that had already worked? That is, until it didn't. In a world where most radical socialist projects have either been defeated, failed, or remained confined to small-scale experiments, it is perfectly understandable why many people want to believe in an ideological doctrine with pre-given answers, and a political legacy associated with powerful states with concrete historical achievements, rather than just some fringe movements with some very marginal victories at best, or a bunch of innovative theories that sound good on paper but haven't been tried in practice. In this regard, Marxism-Leninism often functions as more of a legitimation story rather than a doctrine for revolutionary politics, a regime ideology and a legitimation story that both preserves party legitimacy and gives true believers in actually existing socialism something that they can portray as a success story, even as the goalpost for what passes as socialism moves ever further into a capitalist horizon. Now, anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists, on the other hand, have a very different position on this. They don't view these regimes as socialists anymore, and they consider this kind of general Marxism-Leninism that we described to be revisionist. Anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists tend to be more critical of these actually existing socialist regimes, but for reasons that you probably wouldn't expect. Anti-revisionist MLs often criticize actually existing socialism not because it was too authoritarian, but because it wasn't authoritarian enough. At least not authoritarian enough against the so-called revisionists. Wait, seriously? This must be like some hyperbolic straw man or something. No, I am dead serious. They believe this. Anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists believe that Stalin's crusade against the so-called revisionists was justified, even if there were some excesses along the way. Some anti-revisionist MLs might think that the purges were a little too violent, but often they will outright say, or at least imply, that they should have persecuted more, not less. Those who subscribe to the anti-revisionist line of thinking tend to believe in a very specific grand narrative about Soviet history. Basically, they believe that socialism went to shit after Stalin died. Yep, they view Khrushchev's 1956 secret speech condemning Stalin as the moment when socialism was betrayed and became revisionist. They basically uphold the Stalinist party line and believe that the Soviet Union after Stalin's death became revisionist. This is why many call them Stalinists, but don't call them that, because they hate it, and they don't think Stalinism exists. To make sense of this anti-revisionist position, we need a quick history lesson. Remember those Marxist debates over revisionism that we discussed earlier? What began as an intellectual debate over the proper interpretation of Marx between Kautsky, Bernstein, Rosa Luxemburg, and then Lenin, later turned into a matter of life or death under Stalin. Literally. Being labeled a revisionist in Stalin's Soviet Union now came with a potential death sentence. Critics of Stalin's policies, or those who simply deviated from the party line, were labeled revisionists. which Stalin's cadre used as a justification to purge not just political dissidents in general, but a large portion of the Bolshevik Party's original leadership and membership, who had been there since the beginning of the revolution. And for those who know the history well, who have read historians like J. Archketty, you would know that it wasn't just Stalin himself orchestrating these purges, but many of the local and provincial police forces would use the excuse of revisionism to just purge as many people as possible, often people who they simply had bad blood with or had a beef with. It's kind of like an even more violent statist version of
I feel bad for watching this around Brenny's death. I mean, I know all this stuff, but it's like, I don't know. I don't want me to be doing this. Anyway, glad only 2 people are watching.
the Cultural Revolution. Having these proletarian police forces at the local and regional levels carry out the purges was also a way for Stalin to exonerate himself and distance himself from the excesses. When it comes to the Stalinist Great Purge, there are many debates as to how high the death counts were. Marxist-Leninists like to spend a great deal of time talking about how the official death counts are very much exaggerated. And to be fair, some anti-communist sources very much do exaggerate the amount of deaths. At the end of the day, by even the most conservative estimates, Stalin's Great Purge killed at least 700,000 people, and from what we can confirm in the Soviet archives, at least 14 million individuals were sent into labor camps. The big irony in all of this is that despite all of the endless purges to supposedly cleanse a society from revisionists and stop revisionists from infiltrating the party and steering the society towards capitalism, the so-called revisionists ended up taking power anyway after Stalin died. Now you might be thinking, what exactly made the post-Stalin USSR revisionist? There are a few key reasons as to why the anti-revisionists believe the Soviet Union went down revisionist road. So after the death of Stalin, behind closed doors, Nikita Khrushchev exposed what many people had been thinking but were too terrified to say out loud. Because when Stalin was alive, everyone was scared shitless to oppose his party line, as they could easily end up dead or in the gulag. In this secret speech, Khrushchev exposed the huge death toll and the massive number of prisoners that had been incarcerated in labor camps under Stalin's rule. He also critiqued Stalin's cult of personality and its consequences, arguing that what was supposed to be a party dictatorship had turned into a personal dictatorship under Stalin. Marxist-Leninists like to refute this by bringing up this CIA document that says that Stalin had collective leadership. However, this has been debunked quite thoroughly. I highly recommend this video by NOG Rants on it, and all his videos in general are pretty decent. Also, just please read a history book. I recommend The Soviet Century by Moshe Lewin. It's very long and in-depth and goes over just exactly how Stalin exerted so much power and was able to control virtually all the security apparatus and use it against his political opponents. It's also very critical of the USSR after Stalin, too. Under Khrushchev, the party launched the de-Stalinization campaign to liberalize party debate and loosen up party control just a little bit. Many scholars have argued that this is when the USSR became less totalitarian, at least compared to how it was under Stalin. So as you already know, the doctrine of Marxism-Leninism was first formally coined by Joseph Stalin. After Stalin's death, a major split emerged in Marxism-Leninism between a revisionist and an anti-revisionist camp. Now, aside from condemning their beloved Stalin, anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists generally point to a few other revisionist developments that supposedly started with Khrushchev. First is Khrushchev's attempt at peaceful coexistence with the West, after nearly coming to nuclear war with the United States over the Cuban Missile Crisis. Anti-revisionists saw this as abandoning international class struggle. Second, the anti-revisionists pointed to the introduction of market mechanisms under Khrushchev as well as certain aspects of decentralization, which they saw as steps towards capitalist restoration. Third, anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists critiqued Khrushchev's replacement of the dictatorship of the proletariat with the vaguer category of the state of the whole people, which they saw as effectively declaring class struggle over within the USSR. The funny thing about this, though, is that Stalin himself had already laid the foundation for this revisionist turn in 1936 by claiming that all exploiting classes were abolished, and that the USSR was entering the lower phase of communism, which is something that Mao Zedong would later criticize. It is important to note that the anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninist narrative about the Soviet Union going down revisionist road ever since Khrushchev was first popularized during the Sino-Soviet split by Mao Zedong and Enver Hoxha, who, funny enough, would later end up falling out and calling each other revisionists as well.
Hello there, Maoist. How are you doing?
Yeah, how's it going, Leninist? Do any good revisionism today?
Revisionist? You're the revisionist here.
No, you're a revisionist.
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 No,
Guys,
you're a
guys,
revisionist.
settle down. Enough of this pointless infighting. I think we can all agree that you're both revisionists.
Okay, this guy is clearly the most revisionist.
Was all this commie infighting over ideological purity? Or were anti-revisionist talking points merely a rhetorical ploy to mask the realpolitik of geopolitical power plays between competing neighboring states? Keep in mind that it wasn't just these self-professed anti-revisionists who criticized Khrushchev. Why do you think that other members of the CPC like Deng Xiaoping also denounced Khrushchev's de-Stalinization? Mind you that Deng Xiaoping was one of the people who Mao accused of being a revisionist from the very beginning. So was the condemnation of Khrushchev really just about revisionism? Of course not. If you look closely at the debates, it's clear that the main problem that they had with Khrushchev's de-Stalinization campaign was first and foremost that it undermined the legitimacy of the Communist Party by exposing the atrocities that had occurred under Stalin. Admitting these mistakes had a ripple effect around all the communist world, as the legitimacy of the ruling communist parties, which were now effectively the new ruling classes, was now under threat. This is precisely what the Communist Party of China and Enver Hoxha were saying when they blamed Khrushchev's de-Stalinization campaign for the Hungarian Revolt of 1956, because they believe Khrushchev sowed the seeds for anti-communist activities. Still to this day, Marxist-Leninists like to claim Khrushchev really just about revisionism? Of course not. If you look closely at the debates, it's clear that the main problem that they had with Khrushchev's de-Stalinization campaign was first and foremost that it undermined the legitimacy of the Communist Party by exposing the atrocities that had occurred under Stalin. Admitting these mistakes had a ripple effect around all the communist world, as the legitimacy of the ruling communist parties, which were now effectively the new ruling classes, was now under threat. This is precisely what the Communist Party of China and Enver Hoxha were saying when they blamed Khrushchev's de-Stalinization campaign for the Hungarian Revolt of 1956, because they believe Khrushchev sowed the seeds for anti-communist activities. Still to this day, Marxist-Leninists like to claim that the Hungarian Revolt was just a CIA-backed counter-revolution. And don't get me started on these arguments because they're just as silly as the far-right arguments that Antifa exists because of George Soros or something. You can't just psyop that many people into revolting against the government, unless they have a legitimate reason to do so. What anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists dislike most about Khrushchev, and you can find this sort of sentiment with Marxist-Leninists in general, is that he essentially destabilized the party's grip on power by liberalizing control and allowing for more dissent. Whereas Khrushchev straight up exposed many of the Soviet state's crimes under Stalin, Leonid Brezhnev took a more cautious don't ask, don't tell approach, neither rehabilitating Stalin nor continuing de-Stalinization. They kinda just banked on everybody forgetting about what happened. Brezhnev's policy of developed socialism effectively put Soviet ideological evolution on hold, creating temporary stability but leaving a vacuum that would eventually come to undermine the system's legitimacy. Watching these developments closely, the Communist Party of China would choose a much more sophisticated strategy. Deng Xiaoping understood that if you are not going to legitimize your rule through elections, then the party state has to preserve its revolutionary mythology in order to maintain its legitimacy. So after Mao's death, instead of flat out condemning Mao, the CPC symbolically upheld Mao's legacy, while dismantling all his policies. Deng Xiaoping used the 70% good, 30% bad formula to give a final verdict to Mao's legacy. This genius sleight of hand performed extraordinary ideological work. The result was socialism with Chinese characteristics, arguably history's most successful ideological finesse ever seen, where capitalist mechanisms could generate wealth while the illusion of Marxist-Leninist mythology maintained the party's unquestioned political dominance. Now, this realist lens of seeing ideology as a tool to legitimize power is generally what most Marxist-Leninists just won't tell you when they try to explain these things. They will be perfectly capable of seeing how spreading freedom and democracy is often used as a veil to legitimize American and British imperialism, yet they won't consider how Marxist communism can also be used to legitimize a new ruling class. But instead, they take the official party propaganda at face value. Though unlike the general MLs, the ever-dying breed of anti-revisionist MLs will at least somewhat agree with this, as they do not consider modern-day China or really any of the Marxist-Leninist regimes to be socialist, but rather revisionists. However, what the anti-revisionists also fail to acknowledge is that from the very beginning, with its coinage under Stalin, Marxism-Leninism was always a state ideology aimed at legitimizing the party's permanent grip on power, with socialist construction being a means of legitimizing state control, and categories like revisionists being used by different politicians to legitimize their authority while justifying the persecution of their political rivals. Because the Communist Party was the only legitimate party allowed to rule, power struggles within it were always framed within Marxist language, because they had to use Marxist theory to always justify whatever they were doing, instead of just carrying out their power struggles in a more transparent civil manner like in a multi-party democracy, like how different competing capitalist parties disagree with each other on various issues. During and after Stalin, Marxist language games ultimately served as rhetorical weapons for legitimizing power, by framing power struggles under the veneer of communist ideological purity. Stalin infamously invoked the notion of class struggle to justify his purges of political rivals and those who went against his party line, on the flimsy basis that his victims harbored bourgeois ideology, so therefore getting rid of them was like getting rid of enemies of the proletariat. Stalin would also use the pretext of building socialism and class struggle to justify his forced collectivization policies, in which state ownership became synonymous with socialism. The term kulak, which originally referred to relatively wealthier farmers, was stretched and exaggerated to describe peasants in general who just didn't want to involuntarily give up all their produce to the state. They became a huge scapegoat in order for the Soviet government to justify the forced collectivization policy, which was essentially a geopolitical policy to bolster up the Soviet military in preparation for a potential war with Britain and Nazi Germany. Yes, at the time under Stalin's rule, they actually thought that the British were a bigger threat than the Nazis were. Yet the crucial thing to note here is that this policy was legitimized by the Soviet government by essentially calling state control socialism, because it's pretty hard to justify just collectivizing everything at gunpoint and giving it to the state. So you have to call it socialism in order to make it legitimate. And in doing so, Stalin essentially ruined an entire generation of Marxism by having socialism be associated with state control. More on that in another video. Then, after Stalin, Khrushchev employed the state of the whole people rhetoric to end the purges while allowing the bureaucracy to maintain its power as the new ruling class. Now, despite its general resurgence and its massive popularity online, general Marxism-Leninism is rarely at all used as a doctrine for building revolutionary politics. Today, the only groups trying to take socialist revolution seriously are really just the Maoists and different varieties of libertarian socialists. Before we talk about Maoism, we gotta address the elephant in the room. What are the most contentious and highly misunderstood terms in communist discourse? Stalinism. Stalinism is a quite spicy term in Marxist-Leninist circles. Most people outside of the communist world have an intuitive sense as to what Stalinism is, but when it comes to actually pinning it down and what exactly it means, there are many different disagreements. And because people throw around the term in such a vague way, it causes Marxist-Leninists to often dismiss the term altogether, claiming it's not really a thing. Many of the anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists will often tell you that Stalinism isn't really a thing. They'll just say it's Marxism-Leninism, and that the whole idea of Stalinism is a anti-communist and Trotskyist conspiracy. It's a buzzword that doesn't really mean anything. The irony, of course, is that the people who are most likely to tell you that Stalinism isn't a thing are themselves Stalinists. Now, who aside from Stalin himself counts as a Stalinist? Well, if you Google search, you will see names like Mao Zedong, Nicolae Ceausescu, Enver Hoxha, and even Kim Il-sung. The reason why these specific figures get mentioned as Stalinists has more to do with their totalitarian forms of rule. However, this alone does not make any of these figures Stalinist. Now, Trotskyists, on the other hand, tend to use the term Stalinism a lot more broadly. Trotskyists will define Stalinism as trying to secure socialism in one country and abandoning the international revolution. They use the term to describe not just the USSR under Stalin, but just about all of the actually existing socialist or state socialist experiments, including Cuba, Vietnam, and even modern China. But I don't think this definition is very accurate. Stalinism could more accurately be defined as the doctrine, practices, and political narratives associated with Joseph Stalin and the people who bought into them after his death. Stalinism is broadly characterized by its emphasis on centralized control, rapid industrialization, forced collectivization of agriculture, and mass political repression. One of the hallmarks of Stalinism is its embrace of totalitarian rule, with a zero-tolerance approach to dissent, mass violent purges of party members, and the use of secret police to totally eliminate dissent. Now, given the de-Stalinization campaign, it's quite evident that Khrushchev and many of the Soviet leaders after Stalin's death couldn't really be described as Stalinists. After all, the de-Stalinization campaign is precisely why all the die-hard Stalinists hate Khrushchev so much, and why they call much of the Soviet states after Stalin revisionist. This is why the Trotskyist habit of calling all Marxist-Leninist regimes and leaders Stalinist is not really accurate at all. It is precisely this incoherent use of the term that allows MLs to dismiss the term altogether, not take the criticism seriously. The USSR post-Stalin, Cuba under Castro, Tito's Yugoslavia, none of them are Stalinists. Stalinists consider them revisionists, meaning that they would fall under the more general Marxism-Leninism category. Those who could be
I'm going to take a small break. I hear my family coming home, so hopefully I'll be back as soon as possible. Hope you're enjoying the stream, and oh my god, I meant to delete that. Hold on. And you know, like, comment, subscribe. I'm just kind of goofing. On Monday goofing. Yeah.
Racing around us, overwhelmed forces of darkness prevail. Still in the fight, see advancing before us, red flag of liberty that yet shall prevail. Then all of you workers, fighting rain all over the world and the land and the sea. On with the fight for the cause of humanity. Much, much toilers and the world shall be free. Then
rather not be trampled underfoot. She wants no master over her and no slave under her foot. So let's что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем в бою своей рабочей рукой. Overwhelming forces of darkness assail.
Hi, friends. Well, my family isn't home yet, but hi, if you're just joining us, I'm just watching this, and I feel like it's not quite what I imagined, because I feel like it's like, I don't know. I thought it was gonna be more icebergy. I already said that, and I smoked a little weed, so I'm a little confused. But the point is, shit's wild out there in the world, and I'm just trying to chill out and relax with you people. So I love you, and let's keep going. I was gonna say something else, but I can't remember. So here we go.
Be described.
Just like I feel like it's hard to tell this story without mentioning the CIA at least within the first hour or so. I mean, he alluded to it, but
as Stalinists in a meaningful sense are those who believe and uphold Stalin's anti-revisionist line of thinking and the anti-revisionist conception of history that we described earlier. There are also a few distinctive characteristics of Stalinists if you want to spot one in the wild, and mass violent purges of party members and the use of secret police to totally eliminate dissent. Now, given the de-Stalinization campaign, it's quite evident that Khrushchev and many of the Soviet leaders after Stalin's death couldn't really be described as Stalinists. After all, the de-Stalinization campaign is precisely why all the die-hard Stalinists hate Khrushchev so much, and why they call much of the Soviet states after Stalin revisionist. This is why they
I'm sorry, AspSu80, thanks for the follow. I appreciate it.
Trotskyist habit of calling all Marxist-Leninist regimes and leaders Stalinist is not really accurate at all. And it is precisely this incoherent use of the term that allows MLs to dismiss the term altogether, and not take the criticism seriously. The USSR post-Stalin, Cuba under Castro, Tito's Yugoslavia, none of them are Stalinists. Stalinists consider them revisionists, meaning that they would fall under the more general Marxism-Leninism category. Those who could be described as Stalinists in a meaningful sense are those who believe and uphold Stalin's anti-revisionist line of thinking and the anti-revisionist conception of history that we described earlier. There are also a few distinctive characteristics of Stalinists if you want to spot one in the wild, such as people who defend the Great Purges and the show trials as necessary, those who believe that Stalin's anti-revisionist purges were actually purges of revisionists and not just power struggles, people who think that everything went to shit after Stalin died and blame Khrushchev for taking the USSR off the socialist path, those who implicitly or explicitly think that the Soviet Union could have been saved if they just purged more revisionists. Oh, and Stalinists these days often just straight up have a Stalin avatar in their profile picture. Stalinists also have a weird obsession with Trotskyists and assume that anyone who does not buy into their narratives is either a liberal or a Trot, nickname for Trotskyist. So then you might be thinking, who is a Stalinist? Which notable leaders are Stalinists aside from Stalin himself and his loyalists? Now, out of all the communist leaders, the one who could safely be described as a Stalinist, in fact, the defining Stalinist, is a man named Enver Hoxha, leader of communist Albania. Hoxhism. It's called Hoxhism because it's named after Enver Hoxha, the leader of communist Albania from 1944 up until his death in 1985. Hoxhism is known for being the most intensely anti-revisionist variant of Marxism-Leninism, and by anti-revisionist, this really means Stalinist. If there was any man who represented the ideology of Stalin outside of Stalin himself and his sycophants, it would be Enver Hoxha. I mean, Hoxhism is kind of like high Stalinism. It's so Stalinist that he didn't even think that other Stalinists were Stalinist enough. Enver Hoxha viewed Comrade Stalin as the last true Marxist-Leninist leader, and believed that after he died, the Soviet Union and many communist parties around the world deviated from true Marxism-Leninism. Hoxha fiercely defended Stalin's legacy and rejected Khrushchev's de-Stalinization policy. Hoxha opposed what he deemed as any revisions to classical Marxist-Leninist principles. It's a strict adherence to Marxist-Leninist orthodoxy and resistance to anything that smells slightly like revisionism or capitalism. Hoxha accused both Tito's Yugoslavia and the USSR under Khrushchev of being revisionist, for deviating from true Marxist-Leninist principles, by which he really meant deviation from Stalin's line. Hoxhism only emerged as an actual ideology that people believed in outside of Albania after the Sino-Soviet split in the 1970s. At the time, Mao Zedong actually agreed with Hoxha's critique of the USSR for being revisionist. But then Hoxha ironically also accused China of being revisionist. Everybody was a revisionist and was distorting Marxism, except, you guessed it, Stalin. I mean, Enver Hoxha really likes Stalin. I mean, he's the most Stalinist who isn't Stalin himself. After denouncing the Soviet Union and China as traitors to the communist cause, Hoxha turned Albania into what was essentially a communist hermit kingdom, pursuing an aggressive policy of self-reliance that basically made Albania into one of the most, if not the most, isolated state in the world. Basically the North Korea of Eastern Europe. Though Romania under the rule of Ceausescu comes as a close runner-up for that title. As leader of Albania, Hoxha took Stalin's model and pushed it to insane extremes. Hoxha called for total state control of all sectors of the economy and militant atheism, launching what was arguably history's most militant atheist campaign of all time, officially banning religion and shutting down virtually every single house of worship. He actually declared Albania to be the world's first officially atheist state, and he also launched an obsessive resistance to any form of ideological corruption from the Western world. Hoxha was basically a mix of the most insane ideological fanaticism paired with an insane thirst for power. While Hoxha claimed to be preserving authentic Marxism-Leninism to the obsessive point of psychosis, what he really created in Albania was more akin to a bunker state frozen in a 1950s Stalinist time capsule. A demented psychotic experiment in ideological absolutism that left Albania economically impoverished and politically isolated. Although Hoxha's influence today does not really extend much beyond the weird schizospheres of the internet, it was surprisingly once a big ideological influence for a few anti-revisionist communist parties around the world, who were disillusioned with both China and the USSR. Fun fact, one of the Communist parties of Canada at a certain point in time actually adhered to Hoxhism. However, the parties who adhered to Hoxha's thoughts usually remained very fringe because they came across as a bunch of crazy psychos. Overall, Enver Hoxha's Albania remains a horrifying case study in how the quest for ideological purity can lead down some very strange paths. Now, the truth is that Hoxhism and the anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists more generally are really a dying breed. Those who still insist on the anti-revisionist way have since moved in.
Sorry, my phone just said, please charging, so I gotta plug it in. One moment, please. Sorry about that, I had to look for the thing under the thing. Okay.
Into the Maoist camp. I think it's safe to say that the majority of Marxist-Leninists today more so fall under the general Marxist-Leninist camp. Now, despite all their differences, general Marxist-Leninists, anti-revisionists, Maoists, Hoxhists, all of them tend to get lumped together as part of this group called tankies, a rather controversial term in the leftist ecosystem. But what does it mean? The term tanky originally started as a pejorative to describe the communist hardliners who defended the Soviet Union's decision to send tanks to crush the mass protests in Hungary of 1956 and Czechoslovakia in 1968, known as the Prague Spring. Hence the term tanky, which was originally aimed at members of the Communist Party of Great Britain who would defend literally any Soviet action as anti-imperialist. But the tankies of today are less defined by their love of Soviet tanks, although they do love Chinese tanks, and more by their particular brand of online leftism. Over time, the word tanky broadened to encompass virtually everyone who uncritically supports all quote-unquote authoritarian socialist regimes, from the USSR to contemporary China to North Korea. Tanky tends to describe a certain personality who will defend all of the atrocities of these regimes and dismiss most criticisms of them as Western propaganda. Today's day and age, the word tanky has sort of become like the word fascist. People throw it around very loosely with little regard as to what it really means.
I might have to stop watching. This guy's out of control. Like words have meanings, and if someone is adhering to a political philosophy of fascism, then it's fascist. It's like if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's a fucking duck. All right, chill out. Anyway. I'm gonna keep watching, but goddamn, dude.
Often used as a lazy insult to delegitimize communist viewpoints, often by liberals and also by anarchists. But when the word is used sparingly, it also points to a serious, substantial critique. Today's so-called tankies tend to champion whatever regime calls themselves socialists, and in some cases, they just worship whatever regime they think is anti-American, even the non-communist ones, like Putin's Russia or the Assadist dictatorship in Syria, which doesn't exist anymore. This uncritical defense of virtually any regime that calls itself socialist or one that just merely claims to oppose Western hegemony is why tankies are sometimes described as regime enjoyers. They see themselves as red-pilled truth-tellers reacting against the exaggerated Western propaganda that is created to demonize the rivals of American imperialism, whether it be China, Russia, or any other targets like North Korea or Cuba. And to be fair, many of their critiques of US imperialism often have merit. Were the anti-war activists who opposed the Vietnam War tankies? Were the people who protested the Iraq War tankies? How about the people who defend Cuba against the US embargo, which still exists to this very day? One can be opposed to US imperialism without resorting to the sort of Marxist-Leninist quote-unquote tanky narratives that you see. Now, some people like to use the case study of tankies to equate far-left and far-right authoritarianism, but I think there's one thing that those who make a big fuss out of tankies miss. The way I see it is that most of the time, much of these so-called tankies often just become mascots for foreign regimes because they want something to believe in. And in a time without very much to hope for, who can blame them? Tanky is a word that can be used to describe more of a mentality or an aesthetic rather than a coherent political ideology. I think their regime cheerleading is more reflective of their nihilism more than anything, which is why I personally don't really consider the tankies to be a serious threat in the same way that the far right is a threat. But tankies really don't do much favors for the reputation of socialism. There is a Cold War anti-communist perspective that sees Marxism itself as a totalitarian ideology. Anti-communists will often point to these examples of Marxist-Leninist states as a way to dismiss the question of socialism as a whole, and any criticisms of capitalism. Most serious Marxists refute this claim, and in doing so try to distance themselves from the legacy of the Marxist-Leninist regimes. Instead of pointing to the fact that the ideas that Marx envisioned are totally at odds with Marxism-Leninism, and that there are various kinds of socialisms, the Marxist-Leninist response to the anti-communist propaganda is just to flip it on its head and say, no, they were good, actually. In a way, it's sort of like the mirror of the anti-communist narrative. The anti-communist propaganda is that socialism must be authoritarian in order to work. The Marxist-Leninist response is to say, yes, actually. Of course, they won't really ever admit that these states were authoritarianism because they reject the label itself. What they will do is make a sort of whataboutism argument to dismiss the question of authoritarianism entirely. They'll say, well, what about all the authoritarian activities of the United States and Western imperialism? What about all the dictatorships that the Americans propped up? Doesn't that make them hypocrites? And of course it does. But the Marxist-Leninists take this to a very odd conclusion, basically saying that, well, they do it too, so therefore authoritarianism is a meaningless category. All states are authoritarian. What matters is the class interest that the state is protecting. and who is in charge. And this sort of thinking gives me very little confidence that Marxist-Leninists would be any better at running a regime this time around if they ever got the chance. Now, to be fair, there are some variants of Marxism-Leninism who are far more critical of past socialist regimes, not just the Stalinists we discussed earlier. There have been offshoots of Marxism-Leninism that have sought to go beyond it and add some very new things to it, transforming it into a new ideology altogether. This brings us to Maoism, or Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, as some advocates call it, what they think of as the highest, most advanced evolution of Marxism-Leninism. So let's clear up one major misconception when it comes to Maoism. Maoism is not an ideology invented by Mao himself. If you ever met a dedicated Maoist online, they'll be quick to emphasize to you the distinction between Mao Zedong thought on the one hand and Maoism on the other hand. And it might seem like splitting hairs over semantics, but these things are not the same. Trust me, the Maoists will make you do a struggle session over this. You'll be wearing a dunce cap in no time. While the seeds of what would become Maoism, of course, have their roots in Mao Zedong himself, Maoism is a separate ideology and it wasn't invented until later after his death. So then, what's the difference between Maoism and Mao Zedong thought? Mao Zedong thought is the original framework crafted by Mao Zedong himself and his crew in the Communist Party of China. This Mao Zedong thought would seem to add some new things to the existing established ideology of official Marxism-Leninism. The ideas and practices that made up Mao Zedong thought were developed from as early as the 1920s up until Mao's death, and they were largely constructed in response to China's unique conditions, tailored to guide the Chinese Revolution. Mao looked at Marx and Lenin's ideas and said, cool. But this whole industrial working class thing, yeah, it's not going to work in China. After all, 80% of China at the time was peasants. Mao totally flipped the script. He made the peasants the main revolutionary force, not just the proletariat, as Marx originally envisioned. But Mao would go on to make a bunch of important contributions to Marxist politics. Let's briefly go over some of Mao's major contributions to political Marxism. The strategy of protracted people's war is one of Mao Zedong's most important contributions, not just to Marxism, but to the concept of guerrilla warfare in general. I mean, for a while, Mao Zedong was actually even studied by US military generals. For Mao, the basic idea of protracted people's war was a revolution starting in rural areas where guerrilla warfare was to be used gradually to weaken the enemy, while the revolution then would spread across urban areas. The strategy reflects the importance of peasants as the revolutionary base in agrarian societies like China, which is why it would go on to influence Vietnam and Cuba. Mao came up with the strategy very early during the Chinese Civil War, back when the communists were losing to the Kuomintang, the KMT, in the cities. The communists still insisted that the proletariat was the true and only revolutionary subject. But Mao went against this consensus by pointing out that nobody was giving a shit about the peasants in the countryside. So the party took a leap of faith and went with Mao's decision. They retreated to the countryside and slowly built ties with the rural communities. This would become part of what is known as the Long March, probably one of the most impressive, colossal feats accomplished by the Chinese Communist Party. The fact that Mao Zedong turned out to be right in this decision relative to the rest of his party members gave him godlike status within the party, and it's part of why a cult of personality developed around him. While Marxists traditionally viewed peasants as backward and lacking in revolutionary potential, Mao thought otherwise. He saw them as blank slates, unlike the urban proletariat in the big cities who he believed was more susceptible to bourgeois propaganda. And when you look at how absolutely terrible the relationship was between the Bolshevik government under Stalin and the peasantry, you can see why many were skeptical of this strategy of reaching out to the peasants. But turns out it worked. The mass line is a form of leadership that basically involved listening to the masses, borrowing their ideas, synthesizing their ideas with what the party deemed to be the correct ideas, and then packaging those ideas into a policy program that aligns with the revolutionary goals of the party, in a way that appeals to the masses. Basically, Mao was just telling the party to touch grass. But speaking of grass, if only Mao didn't shoot the damn sparrows for pooping on the grass. Maybe then millions of people wouldn't have starved to death in the Great Leap Forward. Oh well. Now, what is always quite interesting to me about this idea of the mass line in Maoism is that it's positioned as this profound idea, but I would think that this ought to be like standard practice for any political party that wants to represent the people. I mean, it's basically just paying attention and talking to people, not being out of touch in your own bubble. It's like you don't have to be a Maoist to accept why that's a good idea. Now, see, even though a lot of people did die under Mao and Stalin, these two figures were a lot more different than people realize, which is part of why I did not include Mao Zedong thought under the Stalinist category that we described earlier. Many do consider Mao to be a Stalinist, and that Maoism is synonymous with Stalinism. Mao was actually quite critical of Stalin, and this isn't immediately obvious to people who don't read what he wrote carefully. Although both Mao and Stalin had an obsession with opposing revisionism and often used class struggle as an excuse to silence those who disagreed with them, there were some stark differences between how they approached these things. I mean, for starters, the purges under Mao were just simply way less violent than they were under Stalin. Whereas the targets of Stalin's purges would usually end up dead or in the brutal gulags in Siberia, Mao, at least when compared to Stalin, preferred to purge his opponents in less violent ways. His preferred method of political purging was to send people to go work with the peasants, a phrase that I just find really funny. It's like, it's a really euphemistic way to go about purging somebody, you know? It's like a friendly gulag. It's like, just go work with the peasants. Just go, get some experience, man. Don't be a little bitch. But the most significant difference between Mao and Stalin was Mao's criticism of bureaucratization. Mao was actually highly concerned with the Communist Party becoming a bureaucratic elite that would rule in its own interests at the expense of the masses, and possibly even restore capitalism. Oh, who would have thought that? But no, there's no China. There's no capitalism in China. What are you talking about? The people is billionaires, bruh. Mao's solution to this bureaucratization problem was, of course, the Cultural Revolution, a campaign to purge counter-revolutionaries and mobilize the youth to scare the living shit out of the party and guard against corruption and so-called bourgeois elements and rightist deviations, ostensibly to ensure that China would remain on the course towards communism. Mao's emphasis on continuous revolution meant to emphasize that class struggle doesn't end even when socialism is achieved. By this, he particularly meant the establishment of a socialist regime, and his main target of this critique was the Soviet Communist Party itself and the Chinese Communist Party. If you want to learn more on how the Cultural Revolution went down, I have a whole video on that. It's one of my proudest works. You can go check that out. Some of the contributions of Mao Zedong thought were explicitly baked into the constitution of the Communist Party of China and became part of its guiding philosophy, at least on paper. But as we know, Mao would end up having steep ideological disagreements with his party, especially in the lead-up to the infamous Cultural Revolution. Of course, China would end up taking a completely different path altogether after Mao died and the Gang of Four was prosecuted. Now remember, Mao Zedong thought was supposed to be something quite specific to the Chinese geopolitical conditions. It wasn't designed to be a global blueprint for revolution. Even when Mao himself was asked by some of his followers abroad as to whether his ideas could be applied in their countries, he was basically like, well, here's what worked for us, good luck figuring your own thing. But some commies outside of China were inspired by Mao's ideas.
We're advocates of the abolition of war. We do not want war, but war can only be abolished through war. And in order to get rid of the gun, it is necessary to take up the gun.
Ideas were like, hold my little red book, and would run around calling themselves Maoists, mostly in third world agrarian countries like India, Yemen, Nepal, but also in countries like France and the United States. Actually, when the Sino-Soviet split happened, a lot of anti-revisionist MLs became Maoists. And that's why you had a bunch of Maoism in France and the United States, even though they had completely different material conditions. Maoism was a way of being a Marxist-Leninist, but like a real Marxist-Leninist, and supporting the real revolution in China, unlike the revisionist Soviet Union. But there were a lot of people outside of China who didn't call themselves Maoists, but were heavily inspired by Mao Zedong thought, such as the Black Panther Party, who were heavily inspired by Mao's ideas, particularly the mass line. Now, Maoists will insist that Maoism was not formed into a concrete doctrine of its own during Mao's lifetime. But when exactly Maoism did become a distinct ideology is up for a considerable debate. Some say that Maoism was first formed in India with the Naxalite movement. But for now, it's safe to say that according to most Maoists today, Maoism was not formed into a distinct, coherent ideology until the creation of Marxism-Leninism-Maoism in Peru by this wacky philosophy professor known as Chairman Gonzalo. Oh, we'll get to the Gonzaloites, don't you worry. Today, many Maoists refer to their ideology as Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, MLM for short. And I know what you might be thinking. It's not called MLM because it's a multi-level marketing scheme. Despite all the cult-like tendencies within Maoist organizations, they really aren't all that good at marketing. Seriously though, get a better acronym, guys. Today's Maoists include everything from real tough communist guerrilla fighters in the Philippines and in India, all the way to just edgy Starbucks communists on Twitter talking about revolution in a first world country in which the context is so not suited for Maoism. But to give credit where credit's due, Maoism has manifested in various real-world movements. You got the Naxalites in India, the Maoist guerrilla movement in Nepal, the Shining Path of Peru, which we'll talk about in a moment, and the Maoist guerrilla movement in the Philippines, which still actually is surprisingly quite a significant force to this very day. Maoism could be considered near the ultra-left spectrum, although Maoists usually won't consider themselves as ultra-left. For them, the people who are ultra-left are anarchists. But in general, you could say the anti-revisionists are definitely more on the ultra-left side compared to the general Marxist-Leninists who are okay with capitalistic reforms. But it's worth noting that some Maoist strands are more extreme than others. Yep, even within f***ing Maoism, there are different variants. And there are some pretty serious variants as well. On the more moderate end, moderate for Maoist standards, you have groups like the Philippines New People's Army, which operates on MLM principles and advocates for land reform and new democracy. They justify their guerrilla warfare tactics against the Filipino government on the basis that the government is not democratic. And to be fair, that's pretty true. The Philippines is basically an oligarchy governed by rival dynasties. Now, on the more extreme end of MLM, you have those who adhere to the kind of Maoism that came out of Peru, known as Gonzalo thought. Gonzalo thought might be one of the most extreme variants of Marxism of all time. So extreme that even many Maoists actually disavow it. But many don't. If you want to know what kind of Maoists you're talking to, just ask them their opinion on the Shining Path of Peru, and it will reveal everything. Those who adhere to Gonzalo thought claim that Marxism-Leninism-Maoism was first invented in Peru by Chairman Gonzalo, who was considered to be a crazy murderous cult leader. But he is also the man credited for, quote-unquote, synthesizing Maoism into a concretely distinct ideological framework, in which he combined Mao Zedong thought with his own Gonzalo thought, into an all-encompassing ideology, which he deemed to be the highest stage of Marxism. This whole thing started when Chairman Gonzalo was a philosophy professor and had control over the entire department. Him and a bunch of his grad students would go on to found the Peruvian Communist Party, what would come to be known as the Shining Path. The Shining Path took Mao's most militant aspects and cranked them up to 11. The reason why MLMs tend to find this very significant is because while most leftist movements around the world at this time were moving away from armed struggle, because keep in mind this is the 1980s, the Soviet Union is largely seen as not a revolutionary state, neither is China. And most communist parties—
Hang on, I got something going on with my headphones. 1 second. I seem to be having some issues with my headphones. We've been going on for almost 2.5 hours. I guess I'm gonna continue for a little while longer. Let's see. Hold on. Yeah, I am gonna take a break in just a minute, to let my headphones charge. I might stream more later. Thank you so much for watching up to this point, and hope your night goes well. And I love you, and keep the faith. keep the faith. All right. It's going to be okay. I promise. All right, bye.
Weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her. Rum, links, 2, 3, rum, links, 2, 3, wo der Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein Genial, weil der Einheits kommt, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn. Rum, links, 2, 3, rum, links, 2, 3, wo der Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein Genial, weil der Einheitsgott, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein. Rum,